Hello and welcome to Talking Bottom. I'm Ange Pearson.
I'm Paul Tanter.
And I'm Matt Brooks.
You join us this week. We're talking about Rik Mayall, Magnificent Bastard, the documentary that will have just aired at 9 p.m. on Sky Documentaries channel on the 25th of June, followed shortly afterwards on the Sky Arts channel by a fabulous Rik Mayall's rare and unseen sketches. Directed by Todd Austin, produced by Bohemia Films, which I believe is his company. They previously made the Douglas Adams documentary, The Man Who Imagined Our Future. And we have had the privilege of getting some early access to watch the documentary and the sketches. So we wanted to do a special broadcast, as it were, podcast this week, talking all about it. It's because it's exciting to get more Rik content.
So should add we met the director at last year's Rik Fest. He was knocking around there. We had a
We
pint with him.
did. We did
And yeah,
last year, the first Rik Fest, and he mentioned he was making the documentary, and we were hugely excited even to hear that it was in the planning, weren't we? We're going to invite Todd on to talk all about the documentary once his diaries calm down. But we really wanted to do a sort of similarly like we did with Bottom Exposed, which of course we were a part of way back when on UK TV. We wanted to talk about it because it's a really exciting thing to get some unseen Rik material, but then also to hear from talking heads from, I mean, if anyone listening hasn't yet watched it, because obviously it has just gone out, do seek it out. You've got Ade Edmondson, Stephen Fry, Ben Elton, Helen Lederer, Greg Davies, Paul Jackson, John Lloyd, Bob Baldwin, Nigel Planer, and then, of course, also Rik's three children, Sid, Bonnie, and Rosie, along with his brother Anthony. So it's a really incredible amalgamation of opinions and go on.
Max Kinning's in it as well, isn't he?
That's right.
He
Yeah,
was in
Max
it
King.
briefly. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Friend of the podcast, Max Kinnings.
Yeah, Rik obviously wrote his autobiography with him, didn't he? So, and he's doing a book about the official biography of Rik, which will be coming out to align with what would be Rik's 70th birthday in 2028. So we're all very excited about that.
And this documentary has there are various new things that it has that I think that are sort of selling points. I will say I think it sort of broadly covers the same key bits that Lord of Misrule did many years ago. But you know, it's always good to have new Rik content, and it does have new things. Like it's great to have the contributions from Rik's kids to get their insight into living with Rik and what he was like at home. And it's great they've got what seems like sort of personal recordings, don't they, of audio recordings that Rik made that when he's talking in them, there's a real sort of unguarded candidness there that makes you feel like this is the real Rik behind closed
Well,
doors talking, you know?
we really, really should mention Max Kinning's involvement, really, because I believe they are the tapes that Max will have had when he was interviewing Rik for his autobiography, Bigger Than Hitler, Better Than Christ. So it's a real, real treat to hear from Rik, isn't it, on those recordings?
Yeah.
Talking about all aspects of his career, really. And that it opens with a fantastic story, which I think we have heard before, but great to hear it in Rik's voice about how his primary school teacher told him not
Yeah.
to sing, to mouth as if you're singing. And that was his first taste of getting a kick from getting laughs from an audience because he was obviously mugging,
Mm.
Yeah.
mugging and showing off and getting really
What's
good
he say?
laughs. And that
Like
was
about
about the age
20
of 7.
minutes in. 20 minutes in, all eyes just went on to him, and no one was paying attention to the actual shows. What the way he recounts it, I think. But yeah, I believe it.
I do, yeah, and I think that is it's what is it, the phrase, show me the boy at the age of 7 and I will show you the man.
Uh,
And Rik, I mean, that is just exemplifies it, doesn't it? That was where he got his first taste of showing off, getting laughs from a crowd, and he never stopped wanting to get that. And I would say, Paul, I mean, I think this documentary is the documentary that Lord of Misrule should have been. Obviously, Lord of Misrule was made very quickly after Rik's death in 2014, and it felt like there were certain areas that hadn't been quite touched upon, I think, in Lord of Misrule. Ade, of course, didn't take part, and I really feel this is special for that reason.
That is like one of the big sort of bonuses as well, isn't it? And although we've had Ade discussing Rik in his autobiography and on his subsequent tours, and of course in Bottom Exposed, and really sort of bearing his heart and soul on things like Desert Island
Mm.
Disc, I think this is the first time that he's been on camera talking about stuff. And I think in some ways for Ade, this is probably a chance to maybe set a bit more of a nicer story straight in some regards anyway, like for things like when he was talking about the young ones, it was nice to hear him describe working on the young ones as an absolute joy, which, having come off the back of his whole tour for his book, where I don't want to, I don't want to say he disparaged the young ones, but I mean, he sort of wanted to keep the young ones
Yeah.
references quite small, didn't he? But here, it's nice to see him being a bit more generous about it,
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
I think you're right. I think this documentary has been a point in time. Obviously, we're now 12 years on, aren't we, from when Rik died, and everyone's had a chance to reflect. Obviously, Aid's process of what he wanted to put in his autobiography was his focus and his viewpoint, whereas this is him obviously talking about how their career started, how they met, and it is done with affection and quite a lot of melancholy, isn't there, in Aid, similar to the Desert Island Discs
Some of
interview, if
Aid's
anyone hasn't.
bits made me quite sad, actually. Quite sad.
You can feel that he's almost welling up at times, and it's certainly still raw, isn't it, for him, which you can absolutely understand. I think it's very, very difficult when a working partnership has broken down and you're also best friends, and then that was damaged, wasn't it? Because of course, there's loads of factors.
Yeah,
This documentary obviously goes over all of Rik's career really nicely, actually, because it goes through everything from obviously 20th Century Coyote, Dangerous Brothers, Rik the Poet, Kevin Turvey, all the way through Alan Bustard. Obviously, doesn't touch much on Richie, but talks about the
yeah,
live shows and how things sort of
yeah.
came to that. For Aid, it felt like a natural end. In fact, I think he would probably say didn't even want to do Live 5, right? But then there's that insight that Rik really felt like he could rely on Bottom as his
Yeah.
huge success. It's sad to know that he was obviously really, really confused as to, and that there's a wonderful but heartbreaking line from Rosie where she says that, Rik used to ask, I don't know what I've done wrong. And it's so heartbreaking, isn't it? Because I think that's part of his brain
Yeah,
injury
yeah.
and everything else. He couldn't understand why Aid didn't want to keep working on it.
I think you're right there about like the aspects of his career that it covered. I think for most Rik fans who are aware of what we consider to be the main things that we love in his career, it covered those pretty well, and it didn't go into too much of the obscure stuff, which most people would not be hugely aware of. So it kind of covered things quite chronologically, didn't it? It had the brief bit on the childhood, and it
Yeah,
was lovely to
yeah.
see lots of like home videos from the Mayall family and things. University briefly, into the comic strip, Kevin Turvey, Young Ones, Filthy Rich and Cat Flap, comic strip, New Statesman, bit of Blackadder, Drop Dead Fred, bit of Bottom, and then Quad Bike Accident, of course, and then forward to Man Down. And I think for most people, that's kind of the stuff, the main chunk, like the main meat that people, rewatch and discuss when they're talking about Rik's career. So I was glad that it gave all of those things. There was nothing of Rik's where I was like, oh no, you've messed up by missing this thing out. Do you know what I mean?
I could have done with a bit more comic strip, if I'm honest. Is a small niggle, I think. It really glossed over that pretty quickly.
Yeah, you know what? I did think that as well. It could have maybe had a bit more consideration for a couple of ones like Bad News, Mr. Jolly, Festival of Travelers Checks.
My favorite story about him working on the comic strip is him getting everyone else together and saying, this isn't fair, the girls are getting paid less, we need to kick up a fuss. I think that sums him up as a person so well. And Dawn French has said that before.
We've often said when we do podcasts, sometimes people are like, you didn't mention this, you didn't mention that. And of course, Rik had such a wealth of a backlog of character. Like they've touched every single major character, haven't they? And I think, you can't fit all of it in. And obviously, maybe even just rights to show clips and things like that. It's obviously a visual documentary, isn't it? This, so might have been, trickier to cram it all in the edit.
On that subject, with the visual element of it, Paul, as you said, the tape stuff was great, but I loved the little kid Rik that we got to see a bunch of footage of him as a kid. Well, not on stage and running about, just dicking about. Yeah.
On stage at the Norbury doing Waiting for Godot.
Yeah.
Wonderful treat.
That was real gold dust. And also, I mean, the family footage of him doing ballet with, I presume, either a sort of cousin or a niece or, one of the male family when she was little. And he's really just playing, isn't he? Playing the ballerina with her. And it's just joyful. It's so joyful to see him. And that's where I think, again, this documentary kind of, it's the follow on, isn't it, from Lord of Misrule? Lord of Misrule couldn't possibly have got together all of this amount of background research and the sort of the family are prepared to give these sort of things when they're still in raw grief. That came out so soon after Rik died. So I do think, some people might be like, why do we need a documentary about Rik Mayall? I would say, why have we waited so long for another one? I'm so delighted that this exists. We've got the Rik Mayall Comedy Festival's obviously been in its second year now. I'm sure some people might be like, haven't we moved on? I'm like, no, this is the time where we start to reflect and we realize and we talk about, we keep him in the conversation, what an absolute genius he was. And that is why it's so lovely that that's the final line from Aid, isn't it? That he just says, what we should remember is that he was a fucking genius, and that in itself is just lovely to hear. Obviously, Aid coming out with that, but it's everyone is agreeing, and it's that the punk side of it. I think was a nice deep dive. The punk music influence, and why 20th Century Coyote started and all that. I think they did touch upon that a fair amount that hasn't necessarily been discussed before. I really enjoyed hearing from Lloyd Peters, who of course was kind of the founding member of 20th Century Coyote and early Fringe and all of that side of it, and their sort of Aid and Rik being on the bottom of the heap really when they graduated and they had nothing to do and they were kind of doing odd jobs and trying to get their equity cards. Like that bit I don't think we've heard talked about a lot.
Yeah, there was nice to have. I mean, there was a lot of little nuggets of things. Yeah, definitely nice to have Lloyd Peters in there as one of the original 20th Century Coyote guys. But I think you're right, Ange, that it's nice to have this because obviously it's a documentary. It's made for TV. So much of what Rik did was on stage or on TV. That Max Kinning's book, the official biography of Rik Mayall, will be coming out in 2028 to sort of mark what would have been his 70th birthday. And a book will obviously get into the minutiae and the heart and the soul of his life. A book can only do so much to convey the essence of the work. The way that you want to see and experience Rik's work is either on the TV where it was recorded for, on the film that it was recorded for, or if it was audio because he did radio stuff and voiceover stuff as well. So it's nice to have this sort of, I wouldn't say time capsule, but like a commemorative memorial, wonderful thing that kind of like encapsulates the absolute best moments of his career, right?
But to be honest, I think time capsule's the best thing that phrases it. Actually, I would say it's a bit of a time capsule.
It's fantastic in that way, and one thing that I think really shines from it is like you say, we might have heard like little bits of these quotes and stories. I think Ben Elton has said on stage when we were at Slapstick about the story of him seeing Rik and Aid do Death on the Toilet. We've sort of heard we've read quotes from Rik about certain moments, and now this is kind of bringing all of it together in one kind of compendium. And I would wholeheartedly recommend anyone who hasn't yet caught it to definitely look it up or try and get hold of it, because obviously if you don't have Sky, it may well be a while before other people can get their hands on it.
Do you know what? I would say a fact I learned, which if this had been told before, I missed, was that 20th Century Coyote used to write a new show every 2 weeks. So it wasn't that they just put one show on and just stuck with it. They were always writing new material, which was something interesting to learn, that even at that young age, but Rik and Aid and the others were sort of getting into that mindset of fresh material the whole time.
Do you know what that might be for? The reason was probably because they weren't on that many venues. So if they are going to the same venue, it's the same audience.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I loved them saying, that they went to the Band on the Wall pub in Manchester and just asked, can we put comedy on here? And they were like, what? Why would you want to put comedy on? And that's the thing. We're so spoiled. We're so spoiled in this post alternative comedy boom that we can't imagine that a pub wouldn't have a back room where comedy's put on at least one night a week, because that's exactly how we will go and watch live comedy. Certainly, and for the last sort of 30 years, it's been established that rooms and pubs everywhere pretty much will put on a comedy night at least once a week, or an open mic, and it can be music and comedy or whatever. And that is really, like, in a nutshell, that moment in history, isn't it, that they were actually this troupe of perform. I loved Aid's story about they were they were almost dismissed as just being, oh no, they're just strolling players, don't give them any money, but that they were chuffed because they'd finally been described.
So we've been defined. I think that's what you said. We've been defined. That's great.
Yeah, and that is lovely. And another thing I wanted to touch upon, and I don't want to dwell too much on it because everyone who's going to watch the documentary obviously will take what they need from it, but the revelation from Rosie that Rik's drinking on the train back from London before they arrived in Devon, I don't think I had ever heard that he'd been inebriated before the quad bike accident.
Yeah,
Same.
yeah. I've got to say that was probably the one part that I wasn't a fan of hearing,
It's hard.
and what I mean, and there's a dichotomy here because of course a documentary should be truthful, and if that's what happened, then that's what happened. But it was sort of a bit of a shock for me as a Rick fan to, and I'm assuming she was talking about literally this was getting the train back on that day. So
That's how it's portrayed.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's what I mean. Because if not, it's sneaky editing, and it's
We'll have
and
to
because I
ask
did
Todd
wonder about
Austin
this.
when we
Yeah,
get him on. Yeah.
because obviously, like Aid had mentioned the drinking before and other stuff, but on this one, it got another mention specifically. Oh, when we started making money, he could afford spirits. But to have that segment on the train back, and he started drinking miniatures and said, "Don't tell mum," and then we go straight to the thing about the quad bike. It's like, yeah, I don't like knowing that Rick might have been pissed there. But then at the
Well,
same time, do I wish I didn't know that? Well, if it's the truth,
yeah.
then you should know the truth, right? Yeah.
In so many ways, it's, I mean, again, this is where it's almost, it's not, a warts and all documentary. It's so very affectionate. It's
Mm.
not trying to trip up anything or reveal horrible little secrets, is it? It's just honest. And I think
Hmm.
it was actually hard to hear, but also quite sort of, oh, okay, well, that makes more sense. And
Yeah.
also,
Mm.
horrifically, I think when you are an alcoholic, which I think lots of people have alluded to the fact that Rick was, an alcoholic at that stage in his life. You are, if you can't go on a train journey without drinking miniatures, right? And I think you have a certain tolerance level that will be much more heightened if you're an alcoholic.
Yeah.
So maybe in the context of actually Rick's drinking, that wasn't actually so much, but it also emboldens you to do stupid stuff, right? It's why you shouldn't drink and drive, because you feel much more confident to do things. But how lovely in a way that he was asked by Bonnie, can I come on too? And he thought, no, this is
Yeah.
unsafe. You go
Exactly.
back to the house. So he
Mm.
wasn't completely without his faculties. He wasn't being reckless in that way.
Yeah, that's why I don't mind it so much. Like knowing that is uncomfortable, but it's not like he then put his children in danger. He's still a father,
He,
and
he will have been just
like,
emboldened to do stupid stuff, right? And I think Ben obviously revealing the first thing that he said when he saw him in hospital. When Rick came out of the coma,
yeah,
praise be that he did survive. I fucked up.
yeah,
And
Yeah.
then he did
Yeah.
actually quit that, and then he quit drinking, and he had to because of the medication. And
mm,
sometimes these things happen in your life, right? Where it's like, this is the massive wake up call. And fuck me, did Rick have a very fucking tough one, right? I mean, the way
Mm.
they discuss how brave he was and all he had to actually kind of try and privately hide, and what he was battling with, and he was still going out there and performing his fucking life out. Like whenever you saw him after the quad bike accident, like I got to meet him at one of the signings for his book, and he was so full of joy and life and everything. Like he was absolutely amazing even after the I know that he was hard to work with, and obviously all of those kind of things come up in there, but I'm just so grateful he survived that, and learned from it, I guess, the hard way.
They reiterated something that I'd sort of, I think I was aware of, but hadn't really thought about, which was, of course, that the accident meant that he suffered seizures a lot after that as well. So he took medication for it, but with medication for epilepsy, it's all trial and error. You're trying to find the right balance of things, and so that's really something that to live your life up to about 40, not having to deal with anything like that, and then suddenly you're having to readjust. You kind of undergone like a personality change because of the damage your brain's taken, and to have to worry about and experience constant seizures through epilepsy. That's a big thing, isn't it? It's a big life change for someone.
absolutely, Paul. Yes, but what I took from that was really interesting is that after the quad bike accident, he started to do a Rick Mayall impression. Kind of, he was performing to how he used to be, like trying to. He felt like he owed it to people and stuff. But that really interesting.
I think probably what people expected him to be
Yeah,
as well. And that all comes out, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That always on, never off joke that Bonnie, within the family, that they would say always on, never off, and that was a joke because, of course, at home he wasn't always on. He was much more, I imagine, just subdued. But I imagine that joke being amongst the family even is just, well, that's Rick, isn't it? Like he loves to perform, and it is incredible to think of your kids growing up with the amount of adulation he would have got, and that sort of witnessing of Rick transforming when he saw people who recognized him, puffing out his chest and suddenly becoming the Rick. the ego, the character, to play up to people and make people laugh. I think the main thing that comes across is he was always motivated by making people laugh. I mean, that ego character within him, it's not selfish, is it? It's always to try and make other people laugh. It's not like he would make himself an absolute
Yeah.
fool. He would embarrass himself. He would play all kinds of characters that weren't sexy and weren't
Yeah.
whatever. But I love that he had a framed picture of Flash as well. I think that's a brilliant revelation that he had Flash
Yeah.
Heart up in the house, and he was like, "I love how sexy I am." in this.
Well, he was,
Fantastic.
wasn't he? I mean, like Flash
Yeah.
was actually the absolutely most sexy character, wasn't it? Do you know what felt quite sad for me via the contribution from Aid? It was the sea change that seemed to happen between them. From Aid was describing when they did Guest House Paradiso, he described Rick as as talented as Peter Sellers, or something like he could have been the next Peter Sellers. But then when we get to the part, which was only 3 years later, or 4 years later, because they shot it in '99, I think, or early '99. 3 years later, they're doing Bottom Live 2003, the big Wife Fronts tour, and that's where Bonnie tells the story of Aid goes into the dressing room and tells Rick that he doesn't want to work with him anymore.
Yeah.
Bob,
And that's
Bob
such a big
Baldwin. Bob
shift in
Baldwin
their
was
sorry,
there.
Bob Baldwin told the story.
You know.
That Aid went into there and said they didn't want to work with Rick anymore, and it crushed
I
Rick.
mean, and I think, like, why did he need to do it on the last day of the tour? Could he not have?
Well,
That's strange.
it is strange, but in many ways, I guess when you come to the end of a job you've not been enjoying, I guess he probably, I don't know, I can't speak for Aid, but you maybe would just think, I've either got to say it now or I won't say it, right? And it's awful, how harsh is that? But I guess that's the feeling. Otherwise, what am I going to ring up in a week's time? Am I going to see him in a month? And I guess Aid just had to say it because that's how he was feeling, and it is really, really difficult to hear, isn't it? And obviously Bob was there and he's giving his side of it, but Rick came back pale and then in tears. It is really difficult. It was interesting to hear about how emotional Rick was post the accident. Even from Aid, sort of saying he would cry a lot, and he was a man with a heart on his sleeve, I think. Like, that's what I take from it. It's like he lived off this incredible energy and excitement and drawing laughs, but actually he could be very vulnerable, couldn't he? And but only when that bravado kind of, he allowed it to drop. But I think the accident then made that much more prevalent. It was something he wasn't hiding so much anymore, perhaps.
It brought his emotions through to the forefront, didn't it? I did like hearing that. It was a nice touch hearing about how, even like, to counter the fact that he was quite forgetful, he would write himself notes, but it would be in the Rick style. Hello, Rick, you sensational bastard.
Yeah.
Remember XYZ, That's just something you'd expect in the Rick style, isn't it?
Maybe that's a code so he remember, because like, oh, that's me speaking. I'll trust me.
But I think we can talk about what elements of his personality were heightened or lost, but like from the outside, I don't think he never lost that inner, the language and the joking, and that he could always turn on any character. It wasn't like he'd forgotten how to do certain things, but I think he'd forgotten that kind of maybe just inner switch of, like, the filter. Maybe that's what happens with a lot of brain injuries, very sadly, and it's sort of like he was almost unleashed, I think, in a lot of interviews that you see of him after the accident. Like, he's unleashed in his early interviews. It was interesting. I think, again, we can't just keep saying every point that's in the documentary, but when Rick revealed he didn't like being interviewed as himself and he would prefer to be a character, that in and of itself is evident in interviews he has done as himself prior to his accident, isn't it? He does always seem charming and lovely and everything, but he's never quite as comfortable than when he's in character.
Yeah.
And that, I think, then he became the ego character. That's what he started doing.
He preferred to adopt the character of the Rik Mayall, didn't he? Which is the character that Rick and Max kind of based the, and I'll put this in inverted commas, autobiography around, which was essentially, the autobiography that's not an autobiography. It was all in the character of the Rick.
Figured out the workaround, hadn't he, for that? It's like, well, I'll just always be on. I'll always be the Rick, and I'll lead into it to the point of like the craziest, biggest, exaggerated performance you'd ever see. And let's face it, that's why we connect. We all love him. Everyone who watches him is absolutely astounded by the big, the hugeness in his performances. I mean, I loved that, them talking about it with Flash Heart, but it's there in everything. Even in his Kevin Turvey character, he's not playing it huge and big, but he's committing absolutely to Kevin, and he's embodying absolutely Kevin. And I think people say it about Steve Coogan now. Steve's always more comfortable in character. He's always great as Alan Partridge. He's done signings as Alan Partridge. I think he prefers to be in character, and I think that's the thing of most comedic actors, I think, is like they're actually much more comfortable being as a funny character. And that to me was really heartwarming to actually hear about. It was great to hear Craig Davies saying Rik gave us permission to show off as performers. It's like he was never someone who shied away from showing off, even though we've all grown up being told don't show off. And Rik gave a generation of comedians the green light to just be what they wanted to be. And I think that's the overarching thing. As sad as some of the revelations in the documentary are, I'm really glad that we've actually been able to have it's only 90 minutes. We could I was like sad when it finished. I was like, I could hear so much more from all of these people about Rik and their memories with him. But I think ultimately it's a brilliant overview, and I can't wait to talk to Todd Austin about what might have been left on the cutting room floor and what he had to squeeze in.
It is very much feels like a traditional biography, this documentary, kind of, you know what I mean? It feels like structurally it's, I don't want to say it sounds negative, I don't mean negative, but it's kind of like there's not really any surprises as such. It is like, here is his life in chronological order.
That's what I mean when I say it sort of it kind of pretty much covers the same ground as Lord of Misrule. It has some new elements the Lord of Misrule didn't have, but it doesn't have that many more, considering this has been a year in the making and Lord of Misrule was thrown together in a week. Do you know what I mean? The broad strokes are all still the same, but then it's covering someone's life.
The biggest difference is Aid is there now, and everyone said he was sorely missed in Lord of Misrule. So I think that is the biggest difference.
Yeah, I would say, I think, if Lord of Misrule is kind of like, a nice little, it's a tribute show, isn't it? It's an absolute tribute show to Rik, which absolutely had to come out quickly after Rik's untimely death, right? And we would have all been livid if there hadn't been that documentary put together very quickly and the talking heads. Whereas this feels much more considered. There may not be huge amounts more of stories about Rik's career, because of course nothing has actually happened in the last 12 years that's new. It's just that there's more things to go over, right? There's more people to talk to, perhaps. And I do think this this kind of elevates above Lord of Misrule in terms of, there are some revelations. There's the family involvement, and there are just some, like I say, I think the revelations, like from his family and from Aid, like that, I'm so glad that this has been made. It's almost like a part one, part two, maybe, if you want to look at both of them. They're great documentaries about Rik, aren't they? And I think we should touch briefly upon the unseen sketches, which has obviously been put out as a separate sort of 40 minutes.
Well,
I think
they kind of tease it, don't they?
Okay, right. Well, yeah. Let me just say, unseen sketches, because sketches sounds like plural. I'm 90% sure that there's one unseen sketch, which is the pilot Kevin Turvey, and then everything else. I mean, I'm glad it's all been compiled into one format on a TV show, but all the other ones are ones that you can find on YouTube, which are Rik doing Nether Wallop with Jules Holland, doing Wood and Walters, doing Cannon and Ball, and it's great to see them. But there's one unseen sketch.
To be fair to the title, it says Rik Mayall sketches, rare and unseen. And as we know, I mean, how rare is it that there is still unseen stuff of Rik? Like I love that. I mean, I love that pilot of Kevin Turvey. I love how much more sort of centered and quiet, and it's very much closer to the E.L. Listy Peter Cook
E.L. Wisty from Peter Cook.
Yeah, Wisty, yeah. And it just shows like a deadness behind the eyes in Kevin, that then later there's much more excitement and childlike joy behind Kevin's eyes.
It feels like he's still trying to figure the character out 100%. Like it's there, but he's still sort of like working with it. And Rik needed to work out a way to bring his manic energy into that character. And it's always interesting to see a show's often non-broadcast pilot, whether it's like the day-to-day and you see the huge difference in like Chris Morris's hair and what he's wearing and the set and that sort of thing, and the Kevin Turvey thing reminded me of that. It's Rik's different hair. It's much more similar to Rik's better looking here because he's not uglified himself. He doesn't have a nerdy Mac.
Rik the poet, nice short hair.
I think it's similar in a way to Rik the poet to Rik the student, isn't it? Rik the poet is a very different sort of grounded performance compared to Rick the Student, which came much more big and much more outrageous and much more arrogant and all those things. But like the germ of the character is there in Rick the Poet, isn't it? And I loved seeing that unseen sketch of Kevin Turvey because I love Kevin Turvey. But I know what you're saying, Paul. Like, they've obviously called it unseen because they have got one in there. But I don't think there should be any. I was astounded to hear there is still unseen Rick work. Like, please, anyone listening, put out the Peeves, put out the Harry Potter Peeves stuff. I don't want unseen Rick. I want to read it all.
And if anyone out there is currently possessing anything, if you've got like some old 16mm film or 8mm film that has Rick doing a student film, or you illicitly shot something, back in the day when you went to the comic strip or something like that, please let us know, because we'd love to see it. And the world should be shared with the world, because there's no new Rick material ever going to be created. So all we can do is just discover little gems that haven't previously been seen.
Exactly, and that's where I take my hat off to Todd. And I imagine the conversation has been, we could just slip that unseen Kevin Turvey sketch into the documentary, or shall we actually have a separate program that celebrates Rick's rarer sketches, and we can actually put it in there and make another show. And I think that's actually quite a nice way to handle it, rather than trying to cram in, and he was also on Cannonball, and he was also on Theory of Water.
I agree. It's nice to keep the documentary for the life stuff, for this was the career, this was the trajectory. We'll show you bits, but it would have been too much. You'd have been trying to have your cake and eat it if they tried to start putting incomplete sketches. It is nice to have that compendium. I'm being a little bit devil's advocate by sort of being a bit snipey about, well, there's only one unseen thing. I love the fact that there's the unseen thing, and I love the fact that, having seen that, it's now prompted me to. You guys showed me the what was is it Russell? Where is it's Rick doing an interview as Kevin on Russell Harty, where he does a great in character interview. People these days are used to seeing in character, people going on and being a character. Well, Alan Partridge goes on Clive Anderson and he's in character, and more modern stuff. Borat goes on David Letterman and he's in character. But this was Rick as Kevin Turvey going on, being interviewed, and then doing the wonderful thing of like storming off in a huff and then coming back on. It's such a long-term joke. It's such a good payoff. Coming back on like half an hour later to interrupt another guest's bit, because he suddenly thought of a retort to the host. It's amazing. Yeah,
it's so very Kevin. It's brilliant. And so I'm glad that that even that snippet of that with his spiky hair and everything on that chat show, that made me go and think, oh, where's this? Because I would have loved if that was in the rare and unseen, but it wasn't a sketch. It was a appearance on a chat show. There's so much Rick to go over.
There's not many Kevin stuff, so I had scoured the internet for every Kevin thing that is there.
In summary, I would recommend both the unseen sketches and the Rick doc to people, whether you're a fan of Rick or a fan of comedy, or even not. I'd still watch it anyway. But very well made, very well researched, a lot of interesting stuff in there, new bits that I think is definitely worth watching. Yeah.
If we are going to have a little niggle, I will say, niggle-wise, I felt like the music was a little bit too twee or too sentimental or too, it was almost like, I don't know, too Bleeding Heart kind of documentary style. I felt like that sort of, I think that made me more somber and more sad or whatever. But of course, we're celebrating the genius that is Rick, and he's no longer with us, and it is sad. So that would be my only niggle. But I loved it, and I would highly recommend everyone to watch it. If you haven't had a chance to, this is going out, I think, on the night that it airs. So we hope we haven't given anyone any spoilers. Do please go and watch it, even if you've listened to our going over of it, because it's magic. It's magic to see Rick being talked about and kept in the conversation, and I am here for it. So well done, Todd. I hope we do get to speak to him.
Matt, final thoughts?
This sounds really stupid and childish, but my niggle is that all the documentaries of Rick have to end with hearing about him dying. So obviously that's what happened, but I just got sad at the end, and we can't have a time machine. I know, it's sad.
How can he be dead when we still have his poems, sketches, TV shows, films, and everything else?
Exactly. Up the Rick. Thanks.
This reminds me he's dead.
Everyone.
Yeah,
I know, but that's the thing. Rik Mayall Fest and everything is there to celebrate him, and long may that continue. And our podcast, maybe, who knows.
Long may he live in everything we watch and hear.
We're also on social media at Talking Bottom on all of the things. You know what they are. Got a book out as well, Talking Bottom, Guide to the Cult Sitcom. We go on about that all the time. Please buy it if you haven't, though.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening.